Hello, ohayou gozaimasu, and welcome to the first real video for my channel, the first in a series that I am going to make entitled You Should Be Watching. This is a series that I am going to dedicate to exploring both little known, little seen gems from Japanese cinema, films that perhaps you will not have heard of, and to those films that you may well have heard of, may well have seen, but which have been largely undervalued, underrated, or critically overlooked. The first review that I'm going to provide is very much part of the latter category. It is a hugely undervalued, hugely underrated film. It is perhaps its director's most underrated film, although that is arguable. And I'm going to explore something of why it should be reevaluated, why it's well worth your time and attention, and some of the thematic and narrative material that makes this film far more worthy than has generally been allowed, both in Japanese language criticism and in criticism in the West. So the director in question is Kurosawa Akira, someone you doubtless will have heard of. And the film in question is one of his last films, Akira Kurosawa's Dreams. Indeed, he would go on to direct only two further features following Dreams, both of which have been similarly neglected and both of which could easily provide material for this series. Both are well worth your time, especially his penultimate film, Rhapsody in August. But I chose Dreams to look at because it is more widely available, given the Criterion release of the film on Blu-ray a few years ago now. And it's a film that I think, as we begin to look forward to the summer, certainly as we begin to enjoy, hopefully, the early fruits of spring, it's a film that is replete with quite a lot of the simple sort of pastoral joys of the season, I think. Something that Kurosawa in various ways has extolled throughout his career, but which very much begins to come to the fore in his later years. Some have likened this or thought about this as the kind of doodlings, the facile ramblings of an old man who is offering very simplistic laments for the way that we live in the world, the way that we engage with the world around us. But I think there's far more to say about that, and certainly far more to say about Dreams than even the most sympathetic observers, such as Stuart Galbraith IV, author of The Emperor and the Wolf, which is a very highly regarded and well worthy dual biography of Kurosawa and his most famous pro-filmic collaborator, the actor Mifune Toshiro. Even he has largely dismissed, sort of out of hand, Dreams, and I think it's a film that in many ways offers a very significant sort of window through which to understand some of not just Kurosawa's work in general, but some of the ways in which his work was developing in the latter part of his career. So far from being the facile ramblings or doodlings of an old man, I think this is actually a really sharply detailed and delineated series of very personal portraits, very intimate portraits that, as the title suggests, come from directly, apparently, dreams that Kurosawa had over the course of his life, and that relate to various issues largely pertaining to how we place ourselves in the world, how we understand our place in the world around us, and how we treat and deal with the world. It's perhaps this latter aspect that has led some to perceive very didactic themes of environmentalism in the film, and certainly there are several of the 8 discrete, self-contained narratives here that deal directly with environmental issues. But I think rather than thinking about them as didactic, I think these are very questioning, very probing, and in most cases quite open-ended. I don't think Kurosawa is offering any simplistic messages in Dreams. He was asked at the Cannes Film Festival, what is the message of this film? And he said to his interlocutor, if I could say that simply, then I would just write it on a piece of paper and hold it up. There would be no need to make a film. And I think it's this sense of questioning what he's presenting rather than just splurging onto the screen something that is already fully formed, already closed, and that doesn't require any sort of audience engagement. I think it's his questioning that he pours into every frame of this film that really animates its themes and that makes it worthy of attention and thematically of a piece with quite a lot of the director's earlier, more well-known and certainly more acclaimed films. As I said, Dreams is structured as a series of 8 self-contained stories, albeit a lot of these stories have links in one way or another, both narratively and thematically. The through line is a character referred to by commentator Stephen Prince as the I character. In other words, the cinematic narrative alter ego of Kurosawa, his representative in the film, as he traverses several stories ranging from being a boy in the first 2 episodes to being a middle-aged man in the latter episodes. The first 2 episodes, in which the I character is a young boy, feature in the first instance this character encountering a mysterious magical wedding of the foxes in a forest setting, something that he shouldn't see, something that he has been forbidden from viewing, and being caught out in the act, something that has drastic consequences. The second chapter, entitled The Peach Orchard, features this young character lamenting the destruction of his family's peach orchard of the title, his viewing of the spirits of, or he's talking with the spirits of this orchard, who ultimately recognize his grief over the loss of this natural beauty and put on a performance for him. From the 3rd episode onward, in which we jump to the I characters becoming a man, we have an encounter with a mysterious spectral figure in the snow, a figure that may well be familiar to seasoned viewers of Japanese horror cinema, perhaps from Kobayashi Masaki's Kwaidan, or to those who are familiar with sort of folk tales from Japan, particularly those compiled and written by Lafcadio O'Hearn. The 4th episode features the I character returning from World War II and encountering a series of ghostly soldiers who may or may not realise that they are actually dead. The 5th features the I character entering into the landscapes of the paintings of Vincent van Gogh and encountering the painter himself out in France, in the wilds of southern France. The 6th and 7th episodes are respectively apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic fables. The first features a series of eruptions around Mount Fuji. It's entitled Mount Fuji in Red, and features several disparate characters collected as they try and survive this disaster, talking about what led to the disaster and the fallout or the after effects of the disaster. The 7th, largely, we infer, picks up the aforementioned consequences of this disaster, and it features the I character apparently around Mount Fuji and being being introduced via a demon that he encounters to a whole group of like demons who are living in an eternal kind of purgatory because of the fallout of this disaster. And then we return to a very tranquil, very peaceful, very harmonious vision of man living within and alongside nature in the village of the Watermills, in which the eye character encounters a festival. We return to the idea of a procession from the first story. Here it's a procession honouring an elderly lady who has passed away, and the eye character is introduced via a brief discussion with an old village elder to the simple, rustic pleasures and benefits of living at peace with nature with no electricity, for instance. I think then the best place to start with dreams is this idea of environmentalism and humanity's, if you like, place within the world around them. Now, there are obvious, as I've already mentioned, allusions to the destruction of the natural environment and a lament for or sadness over this destruction. The eye character, the small boy, finding himself overwhelmed by emotion whilst contemplating the destruction of his family's peach orchard in the second story. The overwhelming sense of regret about Japan as a provider, a procurer of nuclear power in Mount Fuji in Red, story number 6, the reactors of which are exploding and which are going to lead to the apocalypse, to the death of humanity, something that is lamented in no uncertain terms. But I think we have to judge that the film is not necessarily sharing the points of view of these characters. They may be presented and they may be stated in dialogue scenes rather straightforwardly, perhaps even rather heavy-handedly. But Kurosawa, I don't think, is necessarily presenting these points of view as simply ones that we should absorb or agree with without question, without argument. I think the forthright, arguably simplistic manner in which they're presented is more to make these themes explicit, to the extent that he invites us to contemplate them and to juxtapose what we're hearing in dialogue with what precisely we're seeing in the images. So if one looks closely at scenes such as the peach orchard, story 2, dream 2 in this film, one can see that rather than Kurosawa offering a simplistic diatribe against environmental destruction, which in any case is a fairly difficult fit for what is in the end just a family cutting down a handful of trees. But leaving that aside, if one looks closely at it, one can actually see that it's a young child, a young boy, being upset, not necessarily over environmental destruction per se, but rather against something that is actually aesthetically beautiful, aesthetically pleasing. Now, this doesn't seem incompatible with the notion or notions of preserving the environment. I mean, preserving natural beauty, natural wonders is a perfectly legitimate argument and a perfectly legitimate stand in wanting to live in harmony with the natural world and to keep what is best about the natural world. But neither does it actually lead to any sort of firm conclusion or recondite conclusion that what is being offered here is a sense that human beings are fundamentally destructive and fundamentally sort of poisonous beings, if you like. The child is very emotional, as a child will be. We have to remember that this is a young boy, so his outpouring of emotion must not be divorced from the fact that he is pre-adolescent. He's very young. He's 10 or 11 years old, and as a 10 or 11-year-old, he reacts in quite a childish, or certainly childlike way. I don't use the term childish pejoratively, but he's reacting in a way that is perhaps, in a sense, disproportionate, or at least this is disproportionate from the point of view of an adult, from the point of view of the adult world, which we can infer to be connected to civilization, to rationality, if you like. So Kurosawa is actually offering quite a complex argument here. He's suggesting that this pre-adolescent, someone who has yet to achieve physical maturity, someone whose emotions are quite chaotic, that his outpouring is related to a perhaps simplistic view of the world and what has been lost, what has been apparently cut down, destroyed by adults. But similarly, I think Kurosawa is celebrating that sense of a simple sort of childlike communion with nature. And when we get the dance of the peach orchard, we get something like a kind of no or kabuki performance in which the spirit of the orchard is made manifest in a series of ostensible spirits. What we are getting is a celebration of aesthetic beauty, of the pleasing to the eye, if you like, of something that is going beyond rational argument, going beyond sort of even civilized adult point of view or perspective. It's something that sort of preempts that, if you like, and in a way runs counter to it, which is both positive and negative. On the one hand, there is childlike wonder at the world. There is a sense of enjoying nature and the world around us for the aesthetic beauty that it contains, the contemplation of which has, again, often informed Japan and Japanese society. Things like cherry blossoms, which often have viewing parties dedicated to the perusal of them. But on the other, there is also a sense of the obverse, of the adult, the rational, which is not simply decried in the film. There's a lament for an anger directed against a world that has embraced, seemingly in episode 6, in Dream 6, nuclear power. But there's very little sense, or there should be very little sense, that this is intrinsically wrong. Similarly, in Village of the Watermills, the old man whom the eye character meets, played by Ryu Chishu, a frequent performer in the films of Ozu Yasujiro, he talks about renouncing even electricity, going back to a kind of a pre-modern way of life. And whilst there seem to be immediate benefits to that in terms of this village, I don't think there's any real sense that Kurosawa is extolling this as a viable or a valid way of life in modern Japan or in any modern country. So there is this tension throughout, this sense of dialogue, this sense of two different sort of entities, if you like. What Kurosawa is offering here, and what is perhaps the key animating idea behind all of the otherwise disparate sections of this film, is the idea of a privileged view of the world, or a privileged sight of something that is not available to all, something that affects only, as I've said, the I character. So the boy in the opening story, the opening dream, is alone, witness to something that he very much shouldn't be witness to. That is the procession and wedding of the foxes. The peach orchard, the dance of the spirits of the peach orchard, is for the eyes, the childlike eyes of the I character. Moving forward, only one of the mountaineers in episode 3 is beset by visions of this snow maiden. Only the character of the painter in story 5 is able to see Vincent van Gogh and to enter into his paintings. Only the I character in episode 7 is able to see the demons, and only the same character in the final story is able to see another procession, this time the funeral parade given for the deceased elderly resident of the village of the Watermills. What we have here at the end then is a kind of celebration of death as a way of celebrating and reinforcing the vitality of life. It's an interesting endpoint, and takes us back to the encounter with death in the very first story, where the small child, after witnessing surreptitiously and transgressively the procession of the foxes, the wedding of the foxes, he is told that by his mother that he has to go and beg for their forgiveness, and to be fully prepared to have to take his own life if the foxes deem that he should, for his perceived transgression. So we have this very real sense of two different views of death, as it were, and the sort of engagement with or relationship to life that the presence of death, the ever-present presence of death, we may say, sort of throws into relief or casts light on. And with this in mind, I think this as an overarching sort of thematic arc that develops in various ways throughout the different dreams, the different encounters with death, from the malign snow spirit to the ghosts of the fallen after World War II, to those who have ceased to be human and become something sort of post-human, if you like. This sort of juxtaposition of life and death throughout the film is a complementary sort of opposition, if you like, to the one between not only individual and collective, but also to the one that I mentioned before, between the childlike, the sense of simple wonder, and the adult, the rational, the civilized, and all that entails. And I don't think that Kurosawa loads the dice in favour of any of these oppositions, one in favour of the other. I think he allows them to speak to each other, and he expects that we as viewers sort of make up our own mind. Certainly there are other pleasures to be had in this film. As I said at the beginning, it's a film that is in many ways replete with the simple joys of life, and there are very many astonishing, very arresting images that speak to this. But it's the sense of how we engage with this life that really sets this film apart. How we move through life and navigate our way through life, being beset with oppositions, with contrary or contradictory perspectives to our own, and indeed the sense of death that, as I said, seems ever present. It's this sort of dialogue that really sets Dreams apart and makes it something far more than the facile ramblings of an old man. Where the sense of this being the work of an old man, and Kurosawa was an old man at the time he made this film. He was coming up to 85 years old. It is that sense of encroaching death that really sets this film apart, and Kurosawa's sort of understanding of that through his own, perhaps, self-recognized mortality. Give the film a watch. Don't listen to the naysayers, at least not until you've watched the film and considered it without this sort of received wisdom. I hope you do watch it. I hope you enjoy it. Speaking of enjoyment, if you enjoyed this video, please do click like and subscribe, or not. Comment down below, and I will be making more videos, and I'll see you with the next one.